May War, 1960, 7,000 feet above the Soviet Union. Francis Gary Powers sits in the cramped cockpit of his U-2, believing the thin air is his shield. The generals assured him he was untouchable. Then the world explodes. An SA-2 missile detonates just behind him. The shockwave shears the long, fragile wings off the fuselage, sending the pilot tumbling helplessly into the heart of Russia. In one violent second, the concept of high-altitude safety is dead. But amidst the wreckage, a new race begins. What the KGB doesn't know is that a forgotten mathematician in California is already drafting a design so insane it shouldn't be possible. The impossible paradox. In Washington, the panic is absolute. The CIA realizes their invincible spy plane is now a slow, fat target for Soviet missiles. They issue a demand to Lockheed's Skunk Works that sounds less like an engineering request and more like a delusion. They want a plane that flies at 3 times the speed of sound, higher than any missile can reach, and, crucially, is invisible to the very radar that just killed Francis Gary Powers. The experts in the Pentagon immediately declare the project a physical impossibility. Conventional aerodynamics dictates a brutal, non-negotiable trade-off. To survive the blistering friction of Mach 3, the airframe must be constructed of titanium and stainless steel, materials that naturally reflect radar waves like a mirror reflecting sunlight. Furthermore, to slice through the air at 2,200 miles per hour, a plane traditionally needs sharp vertical stabilizers and a tubular fuselage. Every aerodynamic textbook says these features make a plane look like a flying barn on a radar screen. The laws of physics present a cruel paradox. You can be fast, or you can be hidden, but you cannot be both. The smartest PhDs and committee members look at the preliminary sketches and shake their heads. They argue that reducing the radar cross-section, RCS, of a massive heat-generating engine is a fool's errand. The friction heat alone, enough to melt lead, will make the aircraft glow like a supernova to thermal sensors. It is a contradictory nightmare. But in a smoky, windowless office in Burbank, one man is quietly closing the rulebook. The heretical shape, enter Ben Rich, a man with a slide rule and a headache. While the Pentagon generals are screaming for a solution in the marble halls of Washington, the real war is being fought in a windowless, unventilated hangar in Burbank, California. This is the Skunk Works, a place where the coffee is stale, the air is thick with cigarette smoke, and the word impossible is a firing offense. But the problem facing Ben Rich is impossible. The experts, the high-ranking physicists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, have already decreed the rules. They claim that to make an object invisible to radar, it must be small, slow, and made of wood or fabric. They point to the laws of reflection. A Mach 3 aircraft is essentially a giant metal arrow. It needs a vertical tail to steer. It needs massive air intakes to breathe. Every single thing a plane needs to fly makes it a lighthouse on a radar screen. Ben Rich looks at the standard design for high-speed aircraft, a long, tubular fuselage with wings stuck on the sides, and realizes the experts are right. If they build a normal plane, they die. So Rich does something heretical. He walks into the office of his boss, the legendary Kelly Johnson, and proposes a design that violates 60 years of aviation history. He calls it the Chine. The aerodynamicists in the room almost laugh him out of the building. Rich proposes taking the fuselage and smashing it flat. Instead of a tube, the plane will have razor-sharp extensions running from the nose all the way to the tail, blending the wings into the body. To the Goliaths of traditional engineering, this is suicide. These Chinese will create massive instability. The plane will want to pitch up and flip over backward at supersonic speeds. It's a flying snake, one engineer sneers, but Rich argues that the sharp angles will deflect radar waves away from the receiver rather than bouncing them back. The confrontation is brutal. The aerodynamic team fights him tooth and nail. They argue that the Chinese will make the aircraft unflyable without a computer system that doesn't even exist yet. They demand a standard tail. They demand stability. They demand safety. Kelly Johnson, the patron saint of the Skunk Works, listens to the screaming match. Johnson looks at the radar data, then looks at the stability reports. He slams his hand on the table. I'll trade stability for stealth. Build the Chinese. But the heretical idea doesn't stop at the shape. The team now faces the titanium paradox. To survive Mach 3 friction, the plane must be made of titanium alloy. Aluminum will melt. Steel is too heavy. There is just one problem. The United States doesn't have enough high-grade rutile ore to produce the titanium sponge needed for the fleet. The experts at the CIA procurement office throw up their hands. The supply chain doesn't exist. The only country on Earth with enough titanium to build the plane designed to spy on the Soviet Union is the Soviet Union. So, the CIA pulls off a crazy idea that would make a fiction writer blush. They set up a labyrinth of dummy corporations and fake trading firms across third-world countries. In a desperate gamble, American agents quietly purchase tons of Soviet titanium, claiming it is for pizza ovens and agricultural equipment. The Soviets happily sell the metal to their enemy, never suspecting that they are literally building the sword that will pierce their own shield. The engineers finally have the metal, but they can't work with it. Titanium is brittle. It shatters if you look at it wrong. The tools in the machine shop are made of cadmium-plated steel. When the cadmium tools touch the titanium, the chemical reaction causes the bolts to fall out of the plane weeks later. The wings are literally falling off on the assembly line. The floor mechanics, the powerless guys with grease under their fingernails, realize the textbooks are useless. They have to invent new tools from scratch. They realize the local Burbank water contains chlorine, which corrodes the welds. They have to distill their own water. They are rewriting metallurgy in real time. Then comes the paint. The experts in the Air Force demand the plane be painted white or left as polished silver. It's basic thermodynamics. White reflects heat. At Mach 3, the friction will heat the skin to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. If the plane absorbs any more heat, the fuel inside will boil and explode. Then Rich walks in with a bucket of black paint. The room goes silent. He explains that while black absorbs heat from the sun, it is also the most efficient color for emitting heat radiation from the friction. He argues that painting the plane midnight black will actually lower the internal temperature by 75 degrees. The generals think he is insane. They cite the laws of thermodynamics. They threaten to cancel the contract. Rich stands his ground. He bets his career on the emissivity of black paint. But he adds a secret ingredient. He mixes the paint with microscopic iron balls, ferrite, which will absorb radar waves like a sponge absorbs water. It is a dual-purpose magic potion that solves the heat problem and the stealth problem in one stroke. The final hurdle is the engine exhaust. Even if the plane is invisible, the massive J-58 engines pump out a plume of ionized gas that glows on radar like a neon sign. The experts say there is no chemical solution. You cannot hide the exhaust of a jet engine. So the Skunk Works decides to poison the sky. They develop a special fuel, JP7, laced with cesium, an element that is highly reactive and toxic. When injected into the exhaust, the cesium creates an electron cloud that confuses radar waves, effectively cloaking the engine plume. It is reckless. It is dangerous. The fuel is so stable you can throw a lit match into it and it won't burn. Yet so volatile under pressure it requires a chemical igniter just to start the engines. Every single system on this aircraft is a violation of standard operating procedure. The shape is unstable. The metal is stolen from the enemy. The paint violates thermal laws. The fuel is toxic sludge. By the time the prototype, codenamed Archangel, is rolled out, it looks like nothing else on Earth. It is a brooding, alien dagger. The pilots who see it for the first time are terrified. The experts are already writing the accident reports. They are convinced that the Chinese will catch the wind and snap the neck of the pilot, or that the heat will melt the airframe into a puddle of molten titanium. The bureaucracy is ready to say, "I told you so." The Skunk Works team is exhausted. They have worked 14-hour days, 6 days a week, for 2 years. They have battled the laws of physics and the laws of Congress. Now, they have to prove that this crazy idea isn't just a collection of errors, but a masterpiece. They need a test, a real one. The CIA doesn't want a theoretical paper. They demand a poll test. They want to mount a full-scale model of the Blackbird on a pylon in the middle of the desert and blast it with the most powerful radar systems in the American arsenal. If the radar sees it, the project is dead. The money is gone. and the U-2 pilots continue to die. The ghost on the pole, the Mojave Desert, Area 51. The sun beats down on the Groom Lake test range. Mounted on a massive pylon stands the full-scale mock-up of the A-12. It is over 100 feet of titanium. To the naked eye, it is undeniable. A massive, menacing black shape cutting a silhouette against the sky. The radar operator flips the switch. The radar dish, calibrated to detect Soviet bombers, sweeps across the pylon. Physics dictates that a metal object of this size should generate a blip, roughly the size of a flying barn. The technicians check the gain. They check the power. They assume the equipment is broken. The scope is almost empty. Ben Rich's crazy idea, the Chinese, the black paint, the iron ball composite, has accomplished the impossible. On the radar screen, this 100-foot monster doesn't look like a bomber. It looks like a bird. The radar cross-section, RCS, has been reduced by over 90%. The vindication is absolute. But the real test comes in the live fire of the Cold War. When the SR-71 finally screams over hostile territory, the Soviet and Vietnamese missile commanders are baffled. Their radar shows a ghost, a tiny, intermittent blip moving at a speed that computers reject as an error. Mach 3.2. That is 2,200 miles per hour, faster than a standard rifle bullet. When a surface-to-air missile, SAM, is fired, the Blackbird pilot doesn't evade. He doesn't bank. He simply pushes the throttle forward. The data is the ultimate silencer of the critics. Over the course of its service life, hostile nations will fire approximately 4,000 missiles at the SR-71. The experts said a plane that relied on speed rather than armor was a death trap. They said the Chinese would rip apart. Number of SR-71s lost to enemy fire, 0. In 1990, the Blackbird set a final speed record, flying from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. in just 64 minutes. Then the engines went silent. The SR-71 retired as the only aircraft in history to never lose a pilot to enemy action. The impossible paradox, speed plus invisibility, became the standard for every modern fighter jet. The F-117 Nighthawk, the B-2 Spirit, the F-22 Raptor, they all carry the DNA of Ben Rich's crazy napkin sketches. But the men who built it didn't get ticker tape parades. Ben Rich and his team of grease-stained engineers simply went back to work in their windowless building. They had rewritten the laws of physics, humiliated the Soviet military complex, and kept the world safe from nuclear surprise. They proved that when the experts say something is impossible, it usually just means they haven't found the right heretic to build it. The experts claimed you couldn't hide from radar. They claimed titanium couldn't be worked. They claimed the heat would melt the pilot. But a small team in Burbank, armed with stolen metal and black paint, proved that the most dangerous weapon in war isn't a missile or a bomb. It is a single, dangerous idea that no one sees coming. If you want to uncover more files from the archives of the impossible, subscribe to The Investigator's Archive.